the Humorous Rhetoric of Brexit. And we are very, very happy to have two excellent speakers and friends as guests today. We have Simon Weaver and Martin Rowson, who we're very grateful, of course, for accepting our invitation. They will have 15 minutes each for their talks, and then we'll move on to questions and comments from the audience at the end. So in the meantime, please keep your webcams and mics off, except for the speakers, and then we'll get to your comments and questions in a little bit. So our first speaker is Simon Weaver, who is a senior lecturer in media and communications in the Department of Social and Political Sciences and a member of the Centre for Comedy Studies Research at Brunel University, London, in the UK. His research focuses on the rhetorical nature of humour and joking, and this has included the rhetorical nature of racial and racist humour and the comedy and populism. And he has explored these ideas in relation to Brexit populism in his most recent book titled The Rhetoric of Brexit Humour, Comedy, Populism and the EU Referendum, which was published in September this year. And the title of his talk today is Does Populism Need Comedy? A discussion of the relationship between humour, comedy and populism. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. That's great. So if anybody's familiar with any of my sort of academic work, you'll know that I spent a decade or so writing about racist humour, and most of that focused on humour as a form of rhetoric. As you may guess from the constant mention of rhetoric in my work. I'm just bringing some slides up, so hopefully they work and you can see them. I can no longer see anybody at the moment. Can you just let me know that you can see?
We can see you, yes, Simon, perfect. And we can see the slides. That's
I
fine.
Can see and now in the corner as well.
Can see Martin painting. Right. Can I just say something before you begin? Martin Rowson is painting at the moment live the cartoon for this evening's Guardian.
Amazing, brilliant. Okay. That's great. Well, we'll have to have a close look at that tomorrow morning. Okay, so does populism need comedy? So, as you may guess from the title of my book, this work really sort of began about 6 years ago, just at the time of the EU referendum and the period after that. And I haven't sort of counted jokes. I don't count jokes in my work, but I kind of felt that there was an outpouring of humour, comedy, satire on Brexit, on the EU referendum, and I thought that phenomena was interesting. And we talk about comedy and humour in relation to the various effects and impacts at times, and I thought it might be nice to explore that for a few years and see what I come up with. So I suppose initially I began with the idea that as I suggested with racist humour, racism is a system of ideologies, ideological contents, stereotypes and assumptions about various racial and ethnic groups. I thought that I might be able to make some sort of argument about humour providing a rhetoric for populism, but the outcome was slightly different, and that's because of the nature of populism, I think. In the book, I assert that I make the argument that populism is a rhetorical form. That's not original to me. That idea exists in the populism literature, so I sort of borrowed that idea. And I was new to populism studies when I started this, so hopefully I haven't missed too much. But what we have with populism, I think, is a content. Sorry, not a content. That's the opposite of what I want to say. A vehicle, a structure. Okay, populism is a sort of political structure that can be filled with ideological content. So it can be filled with various sort of ideological positions, and that's why we have left and right populism, national populism, and socialist populisms, and that sort of thing. I'm just looking at the clock and wondering I've got an idea of the time, so I know when to stop. So populism is a vehicle. And really, if you look at it, it's quite a simplistic vehicle. It asserts an idea of the people. That people would usually identify with some sort of strong leader, which was missing from Brexit, of course, although that's been remedied since 2019 to some extent. We have the people. That group of people have a series of others. They have a series of enemies. In the case of Brexit, it's the migrant worker. It's the elite, the experts. Anti-elite discourse is quite popular in populisms, and we've got a sort of alien elite as well in Brexit, who are the sinister European politicians. So you've got this basic structure. There's usually a sense of crisis. It's a narrative. It's a fiction. It's a political fiction. Pretty much. If I was talking with a glass of wine and informally, I'd say it's a sort of confidence trick in a way. It's a confidence trick that sort of reduces complex political issues to simplistic us and them identifications. Now that's a rhetorical structure. It's also built on incongruity, the incongruity of the group, the people, and the other. In Brexit, that was leave and remain. That's the central dichotomy. Which, in the book, I chart a number of incongruities that emerge from that. Sorry, and we know that of course, incongruities are some of the building blocks of jokes. So you've got that similarity as well. So there are a number of similarities, but also I think there's with comedy and populism, you've also got similar social conditions in which they emerge. And I wasn't expecting this. This was quite interesting for me. The populism literature talks about the social conditions in which populisms emerge. I've got them up on the screen. They talk about conditions of relative inequality and decline, resentment. Okay, so feelings of resentment at perceived decline or relative decline, and also social political vacuums. Social political vacuums maybe where there's an absence of trade union organisation or strong civil society structures. Populism might enter those spaces and fill that vacuum, creating the concept of the people. Now, all of those connect with humour styles. Relative inequality, decline, creates a sense of incongruity with where you think you ought to be, and again, connects with the joke structure. Resentment connects quite easily with the idea of superiority theory and ridicule, the idea that you resent a group and you construct ridicule towards that group. And then, vacuums are very similar to the conditions in which trickster figures have emerged. And the anthropological literature on tricksters talks a lot about liminality as normlessness, social conditions where norms are suspended or removed, and trickster figures emerging in those spaces. And I talk a lot in the book about Johnson and Farage at times as trickster figures, people who look in both ways. And I think that idea has been used in relation to Trump. So that's quite interesting. There's social conditions in which humour styles emerge potentially mirror those in which populisms emerge as well. Both are rhetorical, so they're both systems of tropes, metasemiotic, linguistic forms, modes of communication that can be filled with a variety of types of content that fit particular social conditions and situations. So they're both rhetorics. Does populism need comedy, or are they somehow related? Are they cousins? Are they similar types of activity? Self-other, in-group, out-group, constructions that shape our understandings of the world we live in. Okay, so there's sort of some of the observations I develop in the book. Let's give you some examples of comedy in just a moment, and humour, and two other tropes which I think are very interesting: allegory, metonym, key to populism. Allegory, that idea of the moral story. A religious allegory is a sort of a moral story. The people within a populism, they're always they're on some sort of moral quest. I think it's fair to say, and the corrupt are the focus of that moral quest, the group that need to be overcome. So there's I think this is true of left and right populisms. They both sort of assert this sort of sense of superiority or morality through the narrative of the people. And in metonym, we see a reduction of social complexity onto the people and the other. Okay, I've got a picture of Nigel Farage's Breaking Point, the racist Breaking Point poster up on the screen there, which sort of highlights the people of a split, the heartland, the threat to the heartland from the other group, and that sort of thing. And all of this is asserted as some sort of moral panic, some sort of necessary quest. So what does comedy add to this? I've got a chapter on social class, and in that chapter I talk about social class in relation to Brexit. There was a lot of talk at the time in 2016 and since about Brexit as a sort of working class revolt, as a northern working class revolution, and to be fair, none of the political science work or demographic studies bear that out at all. The opposite, in fact. So Danny Dorling, a professor at Oxford, a human geographer, quote up on the screen, 52% of people who voted to leave the EU were southern, from southern England. 59% middle classes, in the middle classes. So this is a pan-class populism. Okay, it's a pan-class populism, but I think comedy contributes to the idea that the working classes were more significant than they were in this vote. Interestingly, I think the idea of the working class is essential to the populist construction of the people. It gives the people a type of legitimacy if it can claim that they're working class people. That sort of supports that populist narrative a great deal more than sort of the realization that actually it's a middle class fascination. So it's a pan-class populism that emerges amongst the political classes. The ideas of Euroscepticism emerge in the political classes. But comedy, we know that comedy can reinforce ideas of social class, stereotypes of social class, but we also know that comedy is structured. The work of Sam Friedman and Giselinda Kopiers in the Netherlands. There are plenty of studies that show that social class, comedy tastes are stratified by social class. And I've got Gary Bushell up on the screen. In the material that I've looked at in relation to Brexit, there's often sort of exchange between journalists, politicians, and comedians, or journalists, media entertainers and politicians. It's quite interesting. An argument between Gary Bushell and Stuart Lee. Now the dates on the screen, a content provider was shown. That's the Stuart Lee stand-up show I'm quoting from, was shown on the BBC in 2019, but the tour took place in 2018. So there's a slight discrepancy there in the dates. But Gary Bushell writes for the Daily Star. Daily Star used to work in a petrol station, and I could stereotype the people that buy the Daily Star, but it's a red top. It's a red top tabloid newspaper. I'd say it's one of the more smutty tabloid newspapers. Okay, it's got a kind of 1970s feel to it. I don't know if it's changed much lately, but it's a tabloid, and broadly speaking, a working class readership. Gary Bushell, he's a reviewer for the Daily Star. He has a real attack, a real go at Stuart Lee, and really puts Stuart Lee in the liberal metropolitan elite class, in the pro-Remain privileged group. Educated at private school, Lee represents a privileged worldview. Lee's a comedian. He's telling jokes. Why is this so important? Why is comedy so important to this discussion? Why does comedy need to be critiqued in this way? It's quite interesting. But Stuart Lee picks up on this. Who are the metropolitan liberal elites? Well, according to Gary Bushell in the Daily Star, if you're in my audience, it's you. So we've got this exchange of populist concepts, populist and anti-populist concepts, a discussion of what constitutes the metropolitan liberal elite happening in comedy and in commentary, in review literature. How am I doing for time? I'll continue talking.
7 minutes.
Oh, lovely, thanks. That's great. Okay, so we see more of these exchanges. James Delingpole writes for The Spectator and other publications. I read an awful lot of Spectator articles while writing this book, and not something that I'd done in great detail before, but that was interesting. But James Delingpole reviews Philomena Kunk, Kunk on Britain, the Charlie Brooker historical mockumentary that really very mentions Brexit very little. Very few mentions of Brexit in Kunk on Britain in the 4 or 5 episodes of that mockumentary, and yet it's about Brexit. It's about Brexit Britain. It's about nostalgia. It's about restorative, nationalistic nostalgia, and it seeks to cut through, to dismantle that nostalgia through comedy tropes. It's an attack on that idea of a romanticized nationalistic version of the past that demands blue passports and a return to whatever. Okay, decluttered society, I suppose. James Bennett Denham-Pold gives a pretty critical review of Philomena Kunk on Britain. Fails to see the funny side, but talks about potential BBC conspiracies. And BBC left-leaning material in a jokey way, in a kind of rhetorical way. He's joking about that. He's trying to see the conspiracy within the comedy, but at the same time, James is appearing on This Week and talking about Brexit and talking about the economic benefits of Brexit, and using a popular cultural image, the zombie metaphor, the idea of the zombie apocalypse, to suggest that it need not be a zombie apocalypse. Brexit, it could be beneficial for the UK. So you see this this mix of tropes, of images from popular culture, of comedy, of serious columnists discussing comedy, dismissing comedy, as the tropes and the ideas of this populism attempt to kind of maintain coherence within this social political space, if you like. Okay, and a further example, and this is one of my favourites, Danny Dyer. Danny Dyer famously on Good Evening Britain. If you're not familiar, Good Morning Britain is a British ITV early morning breakfast television programme. It was hosted by Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid, but Piers Morgan famously walked out. Back in 2018, it was a Good Evening Britain episode which appeared after it was a talk show special after an England football match during the World Cup. I think it was World Cup, and Danny Dyer is on there. If you're not familiar with Danny Dyer, this is Danny Dyer on the picture up here. I don't know if I can use my cursor, if you can see that, but the guy with the beard sat in the sort of third row of the picture, and the picture is from Cold War Steve. Christopher Spencer, the satirist who uses collage, puts images together, and Cold War Steve did a whole series of Brexit-based images that featured David Cameron and Danny Dyer. Danny Dyer calls David Cameron a rude word. It's up on the screen. Says that Danny Dyer needs to be held. That Cameron needs to be held accountable for Brexit. Where is he? And Dyer is a Leave voter who converts to the Remain cause after the referendum, and is picked up as a sort of a poster boy, a popular cultural poster boy for the pro-Remain, pro-second referendum campaign. And we see Vince Cable on Good Morning Britain shortly after that, talking about how Danny Dyer had a point. There's an insight there from the EastEnders pub, and uses Danny Dyer calling, insulting David Cameron to sort of call for a second referendum. But there's a whole series of Cold War Steve collages that show Danny Dyer hunting David Cameron. Sometimes he's got his gun ready, and Danny Dyer is an actor who appeared in lots of action movies. Before he was on EastEnders, he had a short Hollywood career where he played a sort of East End, sort of London tough guy. Okay, and the images are kind of taken from those films. So you see this movement through popular culture, through comedy, and the ideas of the populism being asserted and attacked at various points. Okay, Right, I think I've come to my last slide. Hopefully I'm doing okay for time. Does populism need comedy? I believe it does. I believe that a vehicle which is rhetorical, which is built through various tropes, and I chart a number of them in the book, that is filled with content, is at base a reductionism, a form of reductionism to quite simplistic psychological processes of projection, has a need for other forms of rhetoric to aid its existence. We often talk in humour studies about the impact of comedy, and we suggest that it doesn't have a great deal of impact. And people might say, well, Brexit happened, so comedy didn't have much impact. Will that remain focused comedy? In the book, I talk about how when Gove is criticising experts, when he is saying that rich people have had enough of experts, I make the argument that he's using irony. He's using a comic trope. He doesn't literally mean it. He's using irony. At various points, Brexit politicians, they use irony, they use comedy, and that's a fundamental part of the nature of the discourse. So in terms of the impact, I think Brexit discourse without any comedy, without any irony, with no use of those popular ideas, those popular kind of concepts that we have of what makes the funny, would be a completely different mode of communication. Okay, so the structures have similarities. They're both meta languages. I think Brexit discourse especially is wedded in the comic. It's wedded to the comic. And for further research, I'd like to sort of think about maybe the difference between right and left populisms, the difference between successful and unsuccessful populisms, and their uses of popular culture. And I'm thinking particularly maybe left populism in the UK, the rise and fall of Corbynism, and the nature and style of that discourse. And that would be something that would be interesting to explore. Okay, I'll stop there. Hopefully I haven't run over or run too far under, and turn the presentation off.
Thank you, Simon. Perfect timing. Okay, a lot of food for thought there. So as I said earlier, we'll leave comments and questions for the end, and I'll leave the floor to Delia now to introduce our second speaker. Thank you.
Right. I'm just going to say one question to Simon and Martin and other native speakers. Of course, the question would be, where's Scylla, referring to Cold War cities? Thank you. Okay. So I'm delighted now. Thank you, Simon, by the way. That was great. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Martin Rowson. Martin Rowson, principally artist and cartoonist, who is, I dare say, a direct descendant of James Gillray. I mean, he is in that tradition. He, along with a whole bunch of cartoonists in the UK, but I think what distinguishes Martin, he's very much in the cartoon tradition, the Gillray tradition. And I think I'm speaking for Chiara and myself and those of us working here at the University of Bologna. We particularly appreciate his use of his combination of disgust in his cartoons, of politics and disgust, which is an area very close to our hearts. I shall share my screen now with his presentation, and Martin, you give me some kind of sign when you want me to.
So you're going to get the first image up there, Delia?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you see it?
I can't see it.
No, nor can I. Hang on. I knew that was going to happen. Let me go back. Share. Okie dokie.
There we go.
There we go. Ready when you are.
Okay, thanks, Delia, and pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. My job is, as Delia said, I'm a satirical cartoonist working for The Guardian. Currently, I have worked for most newspapers of whatever political stripe across what used to be called Fleet Street. And what we do is we satirize the news. People say, why don't you do a cartoon about this? Why don't you do a cartoon about that? And so I do a cartoon about what's in the news. And from the early 2010s onwards, Brexit was in the news. Even before Brexit happened, Brexit was in the news. And it just came to dominate everything. And this is a cartoon I did where in 2019, when it was just going on forever, when Theresa May had lost her parliamentary majority, struggling to get through some kind of Brexit, she was being assailed on one side by the extremist Brexiteers, on the other side by the Remainers who wanted to have a new referendum and the rest of it. And in common with all of my colleagues, we were just bored stupid. This is a very rare example of a meta cartoon from me on the pages of The Guardian. It's the kind of thing you can do very rarely when you break that fourth wall, because actually it gets a bit tedious after a while if you carry on doing it. But it's me going to the cartoon supplies hatch in some nominal kind of metaphysical depot, saying, right, so I'll be needing visual metaphors for pitiful desperation, abject humiliation, and so on and so forth. And you can see to the left the Acme trope and cliche disposal skip, which is filled with the unicorns, the deck chairs from the Titanic, the cliff edges, and all the rest of these visual cliches we were using over and over again. And on the right of the screen, you will see half of something which I've been sneaking into my Guardian cartoons since 2011, which is a fur cup. It's a cup made of fur. And as such, an homage to the great surrealist artist Meret Oppenheim, whose objet was a cup and saucer made out of fur. And as an homage to a surrealist object, it is, of course, pronounced with a thick French accent. So it is a fur cup, a fur cup, a fur cup. It's a fuck up. It's a way of visually representing on the pages of a national newspaper, which is read by children, the phrase fuck up. And we will see it repeatedly. Can we have the next slide, please? But I've been doing this for decades. This is a cartoon from 1986 of Thatcher saying she's the housewives champion, but of course she's affecting the lives of genuine housewives very badly through her policies, but she is showing that she's a champion against the European Economic Community as it then was. And this has been running as a kind of undertow to my work because Britain's uneasy relationship with the European Union has been typified because we have had in the last 40 years since we joined, nearly 50 years since we joined, we have had majority Conservative governments for most of that time. And can I have the next one, please? And while the Tories have been struggling with their inability to understand whether they hate foreigners more than they love global capitalism, which is at the heart of Brexit, I think, you had the European Union itself, or the EEC, behaving in ways which, have been pretty rough, have been pretty tough. So Britain was forced out of the European I can't remember what ERM stands for now, but anyway, I'm sure somebody can. So we were driven out of that, and we were then able to reflate quite nicely, which is probably a lesson which the Brexiteers reflected on. But the money markets beat up John Major and Norman Lamont. Next. And shortly after that, we entered into, in John Major's government, what I termed at the time the first postmodern government, which was fueled entirely by irony. It was where you take a disease which was a BSE, bovine spongiform encephalitis, which affects cattle because they are fed the brains of their own kind. So that's a consequence of the cheap food policy. Also as a consequence of the closing of rural the closing of rural abattoirs, the disease was exacerbated. And we find in a satirical trope that Jonathan Swift could not have made up, we find that our national dish could possibly kill you, but drive you mad first. That's a refinement on the just killing you. It will drive you mad first. And then, in something which Swift would never have invented in a million years, we go into a trade war with our closest trading partners to force them to eat our poisonous national dish, which will then kill them but drive them mad first. Next one, please. And as I said, this is all down to the weird psychopathology and anthropological nature of the Tory party. This is a cartoon from 1995 of the still beating heart of Toryism, and they're sacrificing John Major on the tomb, on the kind of altar of Margaret Thatcher. And the next one, please. And while all that's going on in the Tory party, the European Union itself behaves appallingly badly. So the Irish vote down a referendum about exacerbating or bringing together a greater European Union and harmony and so on, and they're forced to have another one. They're forced to have another referendum until they get the right answer. And here is Ireland being given a dog's dinner of a treaty. They eat it, they throw up, and then the President of the European Union comes along and puts a cherry on the top saying bon appetit. Next one, please. And more recently, following the financial crash, you had the deliberate act of, sort of major vandalism against Southern Europe in order to maintain the value of the euro in the bond markets and the immiseration of millions and millions of people across Europe. This is Ireland having been devoured by the soldier ants of the money markets, who are then marching off towards Portugal. Next one, please. And this is the money markets again. So there's an Irish election result. Democracy is of no consequence to appeasing the money markets. Next, please. And then, of course, the hideous tragedy of Greece, which was, again, sacrificed to the bond markets. Next one. Or Spain. I'm still very fond of this cartoon. Goldfinger as a capitalist pig, saying the name's Bond, Spanish government, 10% bond, being zapped. And the next one. And here is Merkel being the Good Samaritan, offering comfort to Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, in 2015. But of course, by now, he's just ahead and she's just pouring the water straight through his head. And the next one. And this is against a background, of course, also of the migrant crisis, which has been ongoing since the mid-2000s. This one's called the Barbarians at the gates. They're the ones on the inside, as the shores of our continent are battered by the corpses of people who are trying to escape the consequences of wars and economic circumstances, which are largely the result of policies enacted in the chancelleries of Europe and America. And the next one. And this was actually after Brexit, where the leaders of the European Union are actually waving goodbye to Theresa May in her flimsy vessel, trying to get rid of her. Next one, please. Those were all rather thoughtful and miserable reflections on European history as it was unfolding, or the history of Europe as it was unfolding. But of course, back in Britain, we had the emergence, and I think this is interesting what Simon was saying, the emergence of this character, Nigel Farage. This is, I first drew him straight, and then this is the first time I actually drew him as a snake, because he lent himself rather nicely to being a snake. He was slippery. He had these nice UKIP colours on him. He was also tempting David Cameron throughout, because the whole reason why Brexit happened is in order to stop the UKIP outflanking the Tory party and taking away a lot of the Tory base. And Farage only got any valency in this country, as far as I can tell, because they kept on booking him to go on Question Time on BBC One, because he was different, because he was funny. Hitler was funny. Hitler was much funnier than most other of his contemporaries amongst German politicians. He made jokes, and people like that. They like to hear jokes. And Nigel Farage is nominally funny, although, as I will develop in a moment, he's one of those populists who appears to be a jolly chap, hail fellow, well met, but of course is nothing of the kind. It's all a complete front. He will run away. He was meant about 5 years ago to be hosting a dinner for a group of cartoonists in the Hurlingham Club in London. And of course, he cancelled that afternoon because he knew perfectly well we'd tear him to pieces. and we'd have a laugh. And he must be in control of the laughter agenda. So the next one, please. And having created him in the readers' minds as a snake, you can then play around with him. So this is, latest from BBC News, all these different images of Farage as he likes to be seen. So there he is as Henry V, Che Guevara, Obama, St. George, Marilyn Monroe, but then the last one is Dr. Seuss's Cat in the Hat, and he's going, no, not this one. Next, please. He is, of course, as nothing compared to Boris Johnson, who genuinely thinks he's a really funny guy. Although I always think, he's a Tory's idea of what funny is. He lands a joke like the R101, which is a British airship, which rather famously crashed in 1929. Next one, please. I did this image in 2015 when he was still Mayor of London, and he said that jihadis were a bunch of wankers. So it's obviously based on the famous Obama poster. Next one, please. I was very pleased that some anarchist poster makers turned it into a poster, which they then posted in his constituency in Uxbridge during the rush hour. It was seen by tens of thousands of commuters until they finally tore it down. It's possibly my most influential cartoon. Didn't make any difference. They still re-elected him in the next election, but that's beside the point. Next one, please. This is from 2016, showing the synergy between Trump and Johnson. And they are, again, they are very similar, and perhaps they're like most populists. I don't know. This is something which can be discussed later on. But they both appear to be beyond satire because they seem to be making jokes. But they make jokes because they want to be in control of the humour agenda, because they cannot stand being laughed at. Because they're narcissistic psychopaths, they feed off our attention, and they want us to pay attention to them, but they cannot bear being laughed at. And of course, the purpose of satire is precisely to laugh at people like them. Next one, please. So this is the end of 2016, when we've had Brexit, we've had Trump being re-elected, we've had the celebrity dieback, where all these celebrities started dying, starting with David Bowie in the beginning, and it sort of carried on throughout the year. And it's been a car crash of a year. Next one, please. And in this country, particularly because of Brexit, and I think this is a fairly accurate representation of what Brexit was about. It was about cloud cuckoo land as opposed to a vision of hell. And the people campaigning for Remain said it will turn into hell. The people campaigning for Leave said it will be like heaven. So it's heaven and hell, it's paradise and inferno. Early drawing of Priti Patel there as well. Next one, please. Whereas, in fact, I think this is Aaron Banks, who was bankrolling UKIP, who is like a kind of Pandora's box, releasing all these monsters from Britain's id, which were grumbling away in the background. And finally, they were given license to start gobbing off in public. Next one, please. In what was essentially an internal Tory party battle of rich Etonians fighting each other in a playpen, in our country having been turned into a playpen for them to strut about it and to see who had the biggest balls. And that was playtime's over as it goes off the edge. Cameron succeeded by Theresa May. Next one, please, who gambles everything on an election which she then loses. Although she wins, she loses it because she loses her overall majority. She's not able to push through Brexit without the support of all sorts of people, including the Ulster Unionists. Here's an Ulster Unionist horse galloping into a hayfield because she said, when asked what her idea of being naughty was, she said she once ran through a hayfield. Next, please. And thereafter, I always drew her as a ghost. She was just a ghost. She had no power. She had no corporeality anymore. And here she is negotiating with Barnier and the European president at a kind of seance where they're trying to get in touch with her to find out what's going on. Meanwhile, next one, please. There's this hideous infant, this monstrous infant of Brexit here on its first birthday. Got his father's lies. Next one, please. And this is a meal deal or a meal no deal. Again, using the gag. Do you want lies with that? Because everybody knew they lied. They knew they lied. And again, please. And in the meantime, there's this idea that we're going to get back to the way things once were and how wonderful that was, and typified here by Spam in a kind of fur cup horn of plenty, a cornucopia, with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who has been peddling the idea that everything will be absolutely wonderful. This is based on a Caravaggio painting. And the next one, please. This is going on for so long. This is to celebrate the 80th birthday of Beano, a famous British comic. And this is all the dramatis personae, as it were, in the battles over Brexit as Beano characters. Seems like they've been around for 80 sodding years. And the next one, please. So it begins to become, it's like a fairground attraction. Here you see, are we going to get to the end? Is it going to fall off the end of the Big Dipper? If you look in the background, you can see this incredibly convoluted Big Dipper ride at the end of a pier. And the next one, please. And there it is, there's a combination of Kaplunk and Monopoly and Mousetrap. And so is anybody else getting bored with this game? And the next one, please. And Theresa May is constantly trying to push through her vision, and she comes back for another go on the helter-skelter at the end of the pier. And again, please. And it sort of turns into a kind of, it's time. She almost comes to represent time itself, because it's time repeating itself over and over and over again. Like, next one, please. A Zen riddle. So here I had all the protagonists as sort of Zen gurus coming up with these gnomic, meaningless phrases. We shall always be leaving the European Union, and we shall never be leaving the European Union. I think would have been
Martin,
yeah.
You've been. Could you wrap up, please? We've had
for sure.
As much as we'd love to listen to you forever, but it's 20 minutes.
Yeah. Quickly gallop through. May goes. The next one, please. There she is going down the gutter. She's replaced by this bunch of thugs from what do you call them? Clockwork Orange. Sorry, senior moment there. Until you get the apotheosis of Brexit, and I'll finish it there. That was, so if you go back again, this is the apotheosis of Brexit. The lying king is there, and the next one is when actually Brexit was done, when we finally left. And there he is. Brexit done, sure as hell have been. And we'll leave it there.
Thank you. Whoops. There we go. Okay, thank you so much, Martin. I'm sorry to have had to cut you off, but you were slightly over time.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much. And I shall open the floor to questions. Would somebody... Is that a hand? Jan. Jan, you need to put your mic on.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Right, very quickly. Given the fact that when in the 1975 referendum, we were not asked about the EU, we were asked about the EEC, the referendum was always going to happen sooner or later. But nowadays, I find nobody out in the ordinary world is talking about it. It's like, well, Brexit has happened, that's the end of that. Now we'll get on with worrying about our gas bills and all the rest of it. Now, do you think the time might be coming when your work is going to be sort of historic, very interesting, studying a phenomena which was in the past? Do you think that's possible?
Is that asking me or Simon?
It's asking either of you. I think it's a general question.
Well, my work is always about it. I'm looking forward to the posterity of being in children's history textbooks, and they'll look at these cartoons and be totally baffled.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Jonas, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Quick question for Martin. Yeah, I noticed that, of course, all your cartoons have a very strong narrative quality, and you've also mentioned some intertextual elements like the snake recurring and whatever. But I couldn't help notice that, of course, you very well managed to capture this whole narrative of Brexit. into really a comic universe, a cartoon universe. And of course, you, as a cartoonist, you follow news events. You do not really know how these events will pan out, but in the end, it all kind of becomes full circle. And I wanted to ask you, just from the production side, how deliberate is it to really, or how important is it to create this narrative universe within your cartoons?
Well, it is quite deliberate, but it's also like jumping out of an aeroplane without a parachute, because you don't know how it's going to end. But the great cartoonist David Lowe said, you know, politicians are merely waxworks that bring them to life. And we do, the satirical narrative process is recreating these people as new characters and then setting them off in a narrative of our own, in order basically to mock them, to make us feel better, so, because we even up the balance between our powerlessness and their misuse of power by laughing at them. And that's a very simple human survival tool. But I'm glad you noticed that, because it is actually quite deliberate. These are more or less meant to be single frames in an ongoing cartoon strip.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the presentation as well.
Thank you, Jonas. Jonas, a question from Kylie Marston. Or Kyle Marston.
Yeah, I'm a guy. It's all right. It happens all the time. Hi, Simon. I showed up with a question, but then you said something, and I had to go about reframing my question. Because one of my mentors, he actually pretty much made his career playing a character of himself, which is something that, looking back, the blueprint that he kind of exposed to the world and how other people have kind of co-opted it, like in ways where they use it as an excuse, saying, what I said wasn't me. That was me playing a role, and how that's evolved in politics. I would love to hear more about the British perspective on that, because I'm American, as you can hear from my voice, and I don't know exactly whom you're talking about in Great Britain.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, are you talking about that in relation to stand-up comedians or politicians? Good clarification. You notice most stand-up comedians on the UK circuit would argue that the material they're presenting isn't you know, their literal viewpoint or their, you know, kind of serious position on material, that it's humour. You know, it's a form of exaggeration and that sort of thing. But you know, I suppose, you know, potentially you could argue we're seeing more and more of that in politics, that we're seeing less literal presentation seriousness and more you know, more of a sort of Johnson with the hair and the scruffy hair and that sort of thing, more of a persona presented, and perhaps I know whether this is new or not, it's difficult to gauge, but certainly the tendency is there. I think the crossover is there. Who are you referring to? Sorry.
The Colbert Report specifically.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'd say in terms of news format comedies, the barrier between the politics of the presenter and the role that they're playing is thinner, I think, in the UK context, probably. In most, I can't think. It's Jonathan Pine who's acting a particular persona, probably based on James O'Brien or something like that from LBC. But you know, there isn't that strong character construction in those types of programs.
Okay, thank you. There's a question for Simon again in the chat, but my chat has gone dark. If one of my colleagues might be able to help me. It says something about, do you find that populism favors certain kinds of comedy, black comedy, parody, slapstick, or you said that Hitler was funny and made jokes, and whereas the person asking the question says that he was led to believe that Hitler.
Delia,
Stalin.
that was me. I'll try to clarify that. I had one question for Simon and one for Martin. This is Will Costanzo from New York.
Thank you.
The question for Simon is, do you find, you've mentioned certain rhetorical forms like the trickster figure, which is specific to certain kinds of comedy, but not all. We find that populism favors certain forms like satire, black comedy, slapstick, parody.
I think, you know, in relation to Brexit, the material I've examined on Brexit, the argument I presented is that leave discourse seems to have these particular tropes sort of embedded within it, and irony is one of them. There's a basic incongruity that frames that both leave and remain populism and anti-populism. It's a dichotomy. It sets up a series of incongruities, but there's irony. There's clear irony within pro-Brexit discourse as articulated by politicians, and I'd say the majority of the comic responses, and that's something to do with British comedy being slightly left-leaning. The majority seem to come from left-wing comedians. Lots of harsh ridicule. I'd say, that seems to be a focus. There are a handful of leave-supporting comedians that have a decent public profile, and most of the jokes that they tell on Brexit seem to unpack some of the stereotypes of Remain supporters. So the idea that Brexit supporters are stupid or that they're racist, they tend to unpack some of that. Not so much harsh ridicule, I'd say. That would be my description, I'd say, of the patterns in stand-up comedy.
Thank you.
Okay, and there's a question for Martin. It's gone. Did Johnson or any of the Tories react to the three cartoons? Becky, hi. Did Johnson or any of the Tories react to the cartoons that said wank?
No, they don't. I mean, it's interesting that they, because cartoons have been part of the political process here for 320 years, politicians tend not to respond in any way at all. They, apart from occasionally buying the original to show that they can take it, because we're an established part of the political discourse. So they keep quiet. If they complain about it, they open themselves to even more ridicule.
Martin,
healthy thing.
Martin, sorry. You once told me that of a politician who bought one of your cartoons and then placed the cartoon in a certain room in his house.
Oh, no. They all hang them in their toilets because it's where.
Thank you.
It's very Freudian and straightforward. I mean, I sold cartoons, damaging cartoons of politicians to politicians who then said, "Put me in more cartoons."
There's a question here from Elena.
Sorry, Delia. There was a question from Jarno from earlier.
Oh.
Yes, his hands. Could I please ask people to lower their hands if they already asked their questions? Thank you.
Jarno?
Yeah, hi, and thanks
Jarno.
for the thanks for the great presentations, both of you. How do you see the evident tension between humorous populism and political correctness? I mean, the most obscene politicians who use obscene humor are definitely not too politically correct. So does it make sense for a politician to be to use this kind of nasty humor, or would it be sensible to be slightly polite at sometimes at least?
If I can answer that first, in my experience, the right-wing agenda, which is specifically championed by people like Spiked Online, and in people like Rod Liddell in The Spectator and things like that, where they say, well, why can't we make racist jokes? Why can't we make jokes about people, these snowflakes? If you attack them, they are the whiniest bunch of snowflakes I've ever encountered. I mean, they really cannot take jokes about themselves, as cannot Boris Johnson. About 6 years ago, a London PR company I did a lot of work for had its 15th anniversary, and they had an exhibition of my cartoons about London politics over 15 years. And Johnson was still the mayor of London. He was meant to come and open it, and I met him a few times, and I know that he can't stand it, and he knows that he's only barely in control of his psychopathology. And if he'd had to sort of had me walking around the gallery with local news TV cameras on him saying, hey, look at this one of you as a fatberg, Boris, that's funny, isn't it? He wouldn't have been able to cope with it, because he wants people to love him. He doesn't want people to laugh at him. He wants people to laugh with him. And it's the same with all of them. Certainly the image I showed of Aaron Banks with these sort of demons coming out of his mouth, Spiked Online started laying into me as, this is worse than Der Stürmer. which it wasn't actually. But you know.
Okay.
Could I just,
I see your hand up again, Jonas.
Sorry, Dina, could I just add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
You know, there's interesting work on motivations for support for populism, national populism specifically. Engelhardt and Norris, US academics, examined US, European national populisms, and they've examined motivations for support along either economic or cultural lines, and they suggest in their work that there's a stronger correlation with cultural values and support for populism. And those cultural values are socially conservative, they're anti-PC, and so they're making the argument that it's a backlash. It's a backlash to PC, multicultural, pro-global cultures and that sort of thing. So I think that aligns nicely with Martin's comments on the sort of the narcissism of the of that sort of persona.
Okay, Jonas.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Simon. Very interesting presentation, by the way, and a very interesting question which you raised, which of course I think answers itself. I think populism and comedy are very intertwined, and we all know that. But I have a question regarding what is called the populist moment, the rise of populism, or the mainstreaming of populist discourse. And I would like to hear your opinion on what that implies for the oppositional function of comedy, because there's been some voices which, obviously populist discourses use or weaponize comedy to mobilize ideas. And there's been some voices saying that satire, and I think Martin mentioned that as well, has been really suffering because of that, because some populists are impossible to satirize because they use a lot of self-deprecating humor, or they just are too absurd for comedy, like a Trump or a Johnson. And there's some academic voices and people outside of academia who say that, for example, satire has what's called a blunted edge, and I think we saw that with the American satirists like Colbert and Trevor Noah, that they really had difficulties to still have that subversive part of comedy shine through, and as a result, they're reproducing establishment discourses and kind of missing the ball there. What's your thought on that?
It's an interesting question. In terms of the potential for comedy to, that's what you're asking, really, isn't it? The potential of satire to sort of get to some of these guys. I mean, Brexit was. Sorry, I got distracted there by somebody say something. The Brexit moment, the populist moment of Brexit, it comes and goes. It's sort of gone at the moment, isn't it? And COVID did a lot to get rid of it. And at that point, the comedy disappears. It becomes less relevant. And I suppose what the argument I've made in the book is that it's the comedy tropes in general are fundamental to the populist discourse, but whether the satire that seeks to attack these guys has any impact, I don't really come to. I'm not doing very well with this question, but I don't really come to a conclusion about that. I'd say I've got the answer. Sorry, I'm going around in circles. The populist and anti-populist dynamic, I think, contains humor on both sides. It contains comedy on both sides, and the comedy is fundamental for those two dynamics. So for Leave supporters, the irony is essential. The ridicule is essential. For Remain supporters, the comedy of resistance is essential for framing the particular moment, framing our understandings in that particular moment. But once those moments have disappeared, the comedy will of course change. It will become something else. But in terms of the overall impact on politicians, what happens, results, whether we have second referendums or not, that's not the sort of question I've addressed in the book. Sorry, I've gone round in circles for your question.
No, that's fine. Thanks. I just do I have a quick follow-up question time, Delia and Chiara, or?
Sorry?
Do I have time for a quick follow-up question, or?
No, we've still got time. You and then you ask your question, and then it's Will in New York for another question. Okay.
Just regarding presentation, Simon, where would you then place in this regard, if you would kind of divided in oppositional or non-oppositional comedy, where would you place Philomena Kunk? Because you've used it as an example to show the similarities between populist discourse and comedy. But I think this is a very interesting example because it's very ironic, and it could be kind of used by both sides to kind of fuel their arguments.
For me, Kunk was very much a pro-Remain, anti-populist comedy that was taking shots at, dumbing down and historical ignorance and a reliance on nostalgia. I think for me those were the key themes. I don't think it was particularly well liked by Brexit supporters necessarily. I haven't found much evidence of that, and certainly the James Denning-Poll review isn't keen. But Charlie Brooker, the writer of Kunk, he's also done some good stuff on in his satirical Wipe, where he at the beginning of the pandemic he kind of ridicules populist anti-expert sentiment, with the move from Brexit discourse to clapping for the NHS at the beginning of the pandemic and that sort of thing. So he's very much a kind of pro-Remain comedian, I'd say, and that's reflected in his work.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thanks, Jonas. Will,
Delia, there was a comment / question in the chat from Elena. She's been waiting
but
for
her
a
mic
while.
keeps going down. So
it's a long comment question. I don't know if Elena would like to open her mic to ask it. Otherwise, I'll read it. Okay. Populist purpose is to speak for the mass and change society, whatever that means, while comedians' only purpose should be maybe to expose human from an individual point of view, not to make the world a better place. Also, they speak the same language, but populists mean what they say. Comedians don't. They just exaggerate their onstage persona, character, point of view for a comedic effect. Do people totally get this huge difference in the UK? I feel that in Italy we're not very familiar with the genre. That's how we can explain the success of movements such as the 5-star movement. In my opinion, what are your opinions on this? Either. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think the purpose of my kind of satire is not to make the world a better place, except in one very small regard, which is to make people laugh and feel better as a consequence. As I said during the talk, the purpose of this is a human survival mechanism to actually laugh at our betters. We can do nothing else. We're totally powerless against the waves of history that wash over us. But what we can do is we can have a bit of a laugh about it. And, as Orwell said, every joke is a tiny revolution. It won't change the world, but it will make you feel better. And in my bulging post bag, digital post bag, the thing I get over and over again, so I feel better now I've seen your cartoon, because that's what I feel about this. These people are a bunch of arseholes, which is, I think that's a political stance which is worth fighting for, to remind everybody that the people in charge are a bunch of arseholes, whether they remain or leave.
I'd just like to add, I think I'd probably disagree with the idea that populists mean what they say. Necessarily, I talk about Michael Gove's, famous people have had enough of experts from organisations with acronyms telling them what to do and getting it consistently wrong. I sort of unpack that a bit, and you can't literally mean that the British public have had enough of experts. He's talking about economics, but if you expand that, you can't literally mean that they've had enough of experts. And if he does mean that, then he can't literally suggest that that's a good thing in any sphere of society. I mean, and to analyze that is to miss the point, to miss the populist point, because it's the sentiment that's important. So he's expressing a sentiment about an anti-elite sentiment about expertise. So I think there are quite a few examples where populists and I suppose politicians in general don't sort of say what they mean. But
and of course the joke following on from that is that everybody's made over and over again is we're really, really looking forward to Michael Gove having a burst appendix and dragging a tramp in off the street
Exactly,
to
yeah.
the operation.
Okay, Will in New York, you've been waiting a long time.
Thank you, Kira. Can you hear me?
Delia, yeah.
Okay, great. It's a question I had earlier from Martin about Hitler's sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to reintroduce it because you said something that I find really interesting. I'd like to pursue it more, which is the connection between love and laughter. That you mentioned that people like Boris and Donald in my own country want to be loved, not laughed at. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that, the populist leaders' need for love and the way they use or fear laughter.
Well, I'm not sure that Donald wants love. I think Donald is actually a much more primitive kind of attention vampire. I think he wants people's attention is what he wants. Whereas Johnson definitely wants people to like him, which is why he can't make decisions. He can't say, well, you all need to stay indoors, otherwise you'll die. And he waits too long to impose that because they might not like him. And, you know, the man is a psychological car crash. He really, really is. And he should be in a locked ward rather than in number 10, I think, because he's all over the place. And his childhood was horrific. His father's a monster. His mother was driven literally mad by her husband's behavior. And, you know, he's trying to wrangle all this at the same time, making everybody like him. And he's never quite sure who he wants to be loved by most. And I think his entire life, let alone his political career, is essentially him falling off a climbing frame saying, Dad, Dad, look at me. But it's a kind of humor which is fatuous. As I said, you know, he's a Tory's idea of somebody who's funny. He is really, really bad at telling jokes. Hitler, however, and indeed Donald Trump, were both quite good at telling jokes. And my favorite Hitler joke was, you know, after the Munich agreement, there was a Nuremberg rally, and he told the screaming Sturms, well, I met that Mr. Chamberlain the other day. He seemed like such a nice old gentleman. I thought I'd give him my autograph. And of course, this is after Chamberlain said, I have in my hand a piece of paper with my both offers. And that is a good joke. By anybody's standard, that is a good joke. And Trump made good jokes as well. Johnson makes bad jokes, but you know, everybody knows that we use humor in all sorts of different ways as a survival mechanism, but also to repel the other, but to attract people who we want to like us by being funny.
Martin, didn't Johnson start off COP26 with some kind of joke that fell flat?
Well, he's throughout COP26. I mean, I pity the poor bloody translators trying to weave their way through these incomprehensible metaphors he's coming up with. I mean, they don't make sense. God knows what they mean in Albanian or Korean. I mean, it's.
Well, when he was in Italy the day before, what was it for the other summit? He was trying to remember the names of the Capitoline hills, and he forgot one, which is quite funny because Dragon Ball also forgot it. And yeah, anyway. So next question, I think it was Don. Don, did you have a question? I saw your hand up a minute ago. Don Nielsen.
It's actually in the chat.
Oh.
What about tongue?
Okay.
Oh yeah.
I can read it.
Go ahead.
You brought up Stephen Colbert, and Stephen Colbert, of course, is two people. He's a very, very conservative person. He's a very, very liberal person, depending on what role he's playing. And he's really, really good at that tongue-in-cheek. I was wondering if Donald Trump was doing a little tongue-in-cheek too. I know that's a far-out idea, but what do you think?
Well, just as I think that Boris Johnson is in fact a Soviet sleeper agent. I mean, it's a bit of a clue in his name. He's called Boris. I think that, you know, Trump is an act. You know, he's a showbiz act, and he has taken the becoming president as an opportunity to advance his career and sell some merchandise, presumably, but it all went a bit wrong.
I agree.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
I have a question if there's nobody else.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I've forgotten it. It was about, I think it's for Simon. I've got my notes. It's about, could you say something else? It's not a question. It's about Stuart Lee, John Cleese, people like this. And more recently, yesterday, John Cleese and the Cambridge furore and so on. Could you say something more about the importance of the media, the traditional media, are now giving to comedians, Cleese, Lee, and a bunch of others, Simon? You started off.
They're caught up in these free speech arguments, aren't they? Quite extensively. Is that what you're pointing to, Delia?
I thought it was really.
It's seen as being right there on the front line.
If comedy is just a thermometer, not a thermostat, why so much attention to them from in all the press? It's not just the tabloids.
Yeah, well, obviously your stuff on Taboo has talked about that. The idea that they play with taboos, don't they? And that's seen as incredibly important for free speech ideas and movements. But I think maybe some of this stuff with populism. I mentioned cultural movements and cultural values and backlash to that. I think they're often on the sort of the vanguard of those types of movements. If we think about the emergence of political correctness, it happens at around about the same time that we see the alternative comedy movement emerging in the UK. So satirists, comedians, they're often on the sort of front line of perhaps new ways of speaking. Perhaps that's something to do with it. So they connect with ideas of free speech quite significantly. That would be my sort of opinion rather than anything else on that. But comedians in universities, for example, are a focus at the moment because they're likely to say things that don't marry up with tick box free speech forms and that sort of thing. We have a free speech permission we have to fill in with before we get a speaker in at Brunel. It's quite interesting. Yeah. It's
We'll be next. I mean, whatever happens in English speaking countries filters through the rest of the world sooner or later. Thanks. Are there any more questions here? Sorry. Are there any more questions? I'd rather you put your hands up.
People are asking if we'll get to see Martin's cartoon by the end.
Oh, Anthony's got a question.
Hello. I wanted to go back to what Simon was talking about. Hi, Simon. About the statistics you were looking at in terms of, and you called it a revolution, and I would think it would be more of a reformation, because we know that the right just wants to take the halls of power and reformulate things to their ideology. So again, revolution's really not happening. It's just a reformation in a sense, a counter-reformation. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, we're humor and funny, we're laughing and everything, but I think you had a really salient point in your research in terms of finding out. We talk about this populism, and often it's just the populism of aesthetics, or it's just a generation of people who maybe grew up working class, but now they own businesses. I mean, in the United States, the insurrection proved that these were people that owned businesses, private jets, they were manipulated. And so again, when we talk about populism, we tend to think of these old ways of, the working class struggles and this. But I think there's this false, I think it tracks that there's this false class consciousness going on. And I think we know that we're living in this epistemological chaos right now. Nobody really knows what anything means anymore. And I think this would tie into what, Martin gives really interesting. He brings us into imagery. That is something semiotic that touches something larger than the narratives that we keep telling ourselves or we're hearing in the mass media and getting to the target. So I wanted to know if you want to say anything about perhaps that in terms of this false idea that these are like the real working men, when in reality it's a middle class riot. You know, these are people who have this, I can take off 5 days, or I can close my shop and not serve gay people cakes anymore. And now we're going to go take over the Capitol because we're doing this for everybody. In reality, it's like the Burgermeisters are angry that they can't have their toys anymore. So I don't know if you guys want to talk. And the second part of that is, I think what Martin does is he cuts through the bullshit with his work, because on a semiotic level, we don't have to sit here and discuss it. So I don't know if that would connect the two things you guys were both talking about.
Well, could I just very briefly say it's a curious kind of populism which is led by an Etonian and a man who literally lives in a gold tower.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And the language isn't keeping up, though, right? We talk about, you know, oh, the socialist communist. You know, I mean, nobody knows what anything means anymore. You know, it's been broken, and we're living in that wreckage right now.
I agree.
Interesting study. Moore and Ramsey at the LSE, they did King's College actually. They did a study of the referendum campaign, press discourse, looked at the themes, and you know, socialist ideas for pro-Brexit ideas from a socialist perspective. They don't feature in the British media. It's with any significance. It's as I said in the presentation, the working class legitimise the people. That's simply that's the trick. You know, the use of the working classes legitimises that idea of the downtrodden people who are rebelling against this elite. But it's, you know, the idea emerges in elite political discourse on the right. Euroscepticism, that's where it emerges. You know, right discourses, and it's got clear middle class support. So it's as I said, it's a confidence trick pretty much to suggest that this is some sort of working class support. And there aren't really any socialist themes in Brexit either, are there? But a vague notion of levelling up, but that's not there's not much detail there.
Right.
Any more questions?
Would you, Delia, press?
Oh, yeah.
No, the Corbyn anti-Semitism thing.
It's exactly what
so
I think Simon's getting at. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. But it's nothing to do with humour. It was Ken Loach, so exactly funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, let's not get to that topic.
That comedian.
I'd like to do something on Corbyn and left populism. That would be fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, I was actually told by one of my interlocutors on Twitter, because I always drew Corbyn wearing a rather nice Prince Heinrich hat.
Yeah, with the star.
Mm. With a star in it, which actually, you know, I don't think it's such a bad thing. You know, I think it's a nice hat. Yeah. Lenin used to wear one. And somebody told me I was personally responsible for the existence of food banks in Britain because of the way I drew Jeremy Corbyn's hat. Because if I saw him wearing that hat, all these people looking at the Guardian, say, actually, Jeremy Corbyn's a good man. But looking at these cartoons in the Guardian, I decided he's a communist. Therefore, I'm not going to vote for him, although he is a communist. I mean, and the populists, as far as I can tell, whether it's right or left populism, deep thinking doesn't really have a role. It's actually not about thinking. It's about voting. It's about you respond to something through your gut, not through
feeling.
I don't like that. It's not fair they're allowed to do that because I don't like them doing it. And there's that, as far as I can tell. It's very, very infantile.
Yeah.
Gratification for infantilism.
Yeah.
This is this is seriously funny and funnily serious.